As we sit quietly, venturing into the 5 brothers from the Bhagavad Gita and the 5 chakras, let your attention sift down from your mind into your body, and really specifically start at the base of the spine. Rest your attention at the seat, the center of your seat of your pelvis. Without having to modify or coerce your breathing, invite the inhale to touch the base of the pelvis energetically, and for the exhale to relax any unnecessary tension at the pelvic floor. With appreciation for the moments of presence you have at the base of the pelvis, enjoy the next few breath cycles again without modifying or coercing the breath. Just imagine the inhale lightly touches the pelvic floor, and the exhale is an invitation to relax any unnecessary tension or angst at the pelvic floor. And if your mind repeatedly bounces away from the pelvic floor, first know that that's very common. And you only need to coax your attention back to noticing, in much the same way that the kind usher at the symphony brings the patron back to his or her seat if they wander away. And they do that kindly. having rested your attention there, now bring your awareness into the heart, into the fourth chakra. And notice what's present. Notice like you might notice a garden or a weather pattern with openness, with the absence of judgment. When your awareness is tending to the heart center, the fourth chakra, notice what changes for you, if anything, in your mind, like in the mind's mood, or even in its narrative. If there's a change for you physiologically, energetically, notice that too. You can join your hands together at your heart in Anjali Mudra. And with appreciation for your efforts to notice what you noticed and to notice yourself noticing, you may bow your head to your heart. And release your hands and open your eyes. I was just thinking last night, Kate, how fortunate to have met your husband. He's been such a part of our training.
I know.
All along, and then he got to come last night to the Dharma. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad he's interested to come.
Yeah, me too. It's nice. It's a nice Friday night outing. That was our date night. Dharma talk date night. So, in looking at the 5 chakras, there are many ways to look at the chakras, but I want to look at it this morning through the lens of the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm going to keep the 26 qualities of the sattvic heart up here on the board for now. So something that I was deliberate about there was bringing your attention to your first chakra and then to your fourth chakra. And I'm just curious, by way of your own experience, anecdotally, what you noticed. What you noticed, even what you might have felt like you were missing in that I didn't go to every chakra, what you noticed specifically in the fourth or the first center, energetic center. It's easier if you say what you noticed out loud, because we hear it better.
I'll go first.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so when I was focusing on the first chakra, I felt like I was really spreading out and sinking down to the ground. I was getting shorter, but more connected to Earth. And then focusing on the heart chakra, I actually felt like a moment when my spine just adjusted and I rose up.
Lovely, lovely. So I want to remind myself right now to talk about the vayus and the chakras today too, because you're articulating something about the vayus that's very important, and they intersect with the chakras, and they're important to understand about your doshas too. So we have to be here for the next 6 or 7 hours. It's gonna be a really deep discussion. So if I veer away from, if I forget to come back, please remind me about the vayus. What else did you notice?
Yes, the weather pattern in the heart
Mhm.
is like really windy.
Oh.
And I just read that. Is this the god of wind?
Yes. Yeah, Bhima. His name is Bhima. Like the character in the Gita is Bhima, and the heart chakra is governed by the god of wind.
Mm.
And actually, Vayus mean like the winds in the body, the 5 winds. The 5 pranas, sometimes we call them. Yeah. Was it pleasant or unpleasant or not? Neither one.
Wind was going in 2 directions, so that was a little.
And when you were watching it, were you like witnessing with delight or feeling some concern or what, something else?
I was interested, curious.
Yeah, great. Thank you. What else did you notice?
I came in a little bit late to the beginning of the pelvic floor area, and that could be why I never quite settled into that, but I noticed a sense of relief when we went to the heart chakra. Like it was just an easier place to be like, okay, yeah, that's like closer to my head, so it was easier for me.
Yeah.
Settle into.
Yes. When I was first entering the community of people who practice Vipassana meditation, the teachers, this was in the 80s, I was in Harvard Square where I went to graduate school, so we had a lot of access to Vipassana meditation, and the teachers in that group, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, they were all in the region, so they consistently wanted to teach us to meditate on the sensation entering and exiting the nose, and I felt it was too close to my head. This just made me think a lot more, like, because it's right here, so geographically I felt it was too close to my head. And if I rested my attention in my heart, or if I went down with the breath to the pelvis, I actually relaxed a lot more about practicing Vipassana. And I was in my early 20s, so still, first few years into the pitta phase of life, and I had a very fiery mind. I wanted to learn a lot of things all at once, and I wanted to already know them, and already be steeped and simmered and mature about it all. And so meditating here was very restless for me, and meditating here or down lower was much more grounding. So I think the region of where you feel yourself taking a seat makes a difference. And our doshas and our vayus are also contributing us to the choices that we could make to be more skillful. So I smile at your anecdote. Thank you. Is there one more person who's willing to say what you noticed? How was the absence of the 2nd and 3rd chakra? I didn't mention that.
A little like, wait,
Yeah.
what about
Yeah. That was really specific on my part because I've been observing in our community, and I observe sometimes through social media. I'm not really good at social media, total confession. I only see it every so often. And so my observations in our community are through whatever I see in social media and the anecdotes and narratives I get when I'm talking to clients or students, as well as when we were traveling in India. And what I see prevalent right now is a hunger for a tribe or community and a desire to be more grounded, and also a big longing for love and heart. And that being said, maybe not as much necessary attention on the 2nd and 3rd chakra, which are representing other aspects of our human journey. And the longing for love, actually according to the chakras, can't be satisfied unless the other chakras are also in balance. So that feeling of like, wait, what about these others? Is true, it's real, it's visceral in fact. So the chakras do act like an evolutionary process, and they develop along the way with our spiritual journey. They're also related to our actual developmental processes in our physiology and our brain, and minds and hearts too. So let's look at it in the family of the 5 brothers, because the narrative in the Bhagavad Gita is about Arjuna, and he is the 3rd chakra. So he sits in the middle of his 4 other brothers, 2 as it were below and 2 above. And I love to talk about Arjuna. I feel a very impish relationship to this mythical character. My fantasy vision of what's happening when they go back to the kingdom and they realize that it's really become quite tragic and devastated and it's far, far afield from its dharma, that they get there and all 5 brothers are shocked. They had been off in the forest in exile for 12 years, studying, practicing, refining their yoga, and then they were permitted to come back to the kingdom and they saw that it had really gone to pieces. And in their shock and dismay, I picture Arjuna's 2 brothers to his left and 2 brothers to his right saying to him, "No, you go out there, you go take care of it." Like they're just pushing him onto the battlefield. "You go." "No, not us, you go, you're the one." And I picture him kind of reluctantly trying to backpedal away from that responsibility. He is the 3rd chakra, so he's also the middle child. Is anybody else a middle child in this room? Oh, yeah, and how's that?
I think it's a good spot.
And there can be some pressure from the older or the younger, like what is coming downstream, what is happening upstream too. Anybody else a middle child? Mm-hmm. And how is it?
Yeah, I'm kind of get lost in the mix.
Sometimes you can get lost in the mix. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good for an introvert, though.
Very good.
Yeah. Arjuna didn't get tasked with an introvert's assignment here. He's supposed to be going out to the battle on the battleground. Of course, his work is internal. He's battling the 100 cousins across the field, which are the 100 ways the mind goes out of balance and causes its own psychological dismay. So I have this image of his brothers pushing him out there, and his brothers have 4 essential skills he also needs for his place at the 3rd chakra. So the 2 below, the first brother who sits at the 1st chakra is called Sahadeva. Saha means together, like when we say Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Savidyam Karavavahai. Every line starts with the word Saha, means together, that we come together to practice. There's a togetherness. And Deva means divine. So Sahadeva, his responsibility, yogically speaking, his responsibility is for restraint. Specifically, he represents restraining the sense tendencies so we aren't pulled so apart. We aren't so disparate, we aren't so distracted, we aren't so dissipated. He's asking us to come together with the root chakra, to have a sense of tribe and community and belonging. To do that, he says, restrain the sense tendencies because they're understanding that they lead you astray, like one sense for pleasure, one sense for pain. So we want to grasp for pleasure and avoid pain. And all 5 senses were originally programmed or offered to us in the human system to preserve our lives. So at their base, each of the senses is to help us with preservation. So seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, which becomes a pendulum back and forth. We can have a lot of vacillation there. We can get very distracted. And rather than resting at the root with that sense of divine togetherness, we are pulled apart into pieces. Do you understand what I mean by that? So in the sense of being brought to center, being brought to your cohesive root, your sense of grounding, the tribe is actually not just metaphorically important. Having sangha is very important. It's not just alluded to as an afterthought. And when I was saying earlier about social media, what I see is people seeking more community. And in the teachings of yoga, we would say that community is one of the essential factors that stabilizes your life. And we need a felt sense of community that's both visceral and physical, like we're in each other's actual company. We also need to internalize each other as allies on the path of yoga. And to feel that we are taking this responsibility for our togetherness. So we nurture that togetherness in the Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Savidyam Karavavahai. We're saying when we practice together, may it be nurturing, may it nourish us, may it protect. May it protect us from what, do you think?
strength from the path.
Yeah, may it protect us from like distractions or that sense of going to pieces or being pulled apart instead of being brought together. May we be protected from the forces that tempt us for that, like grasping for pleasure and avoiding pain. And then we say, Sa vidyam karavavahai. Now that we're being nourished and protected, may we practice vigorously in a clear direction. So to do that, you have to practice some restraint, like riverbanks restrain the river to give it direction. We were having some laughs last night watching a stand-up comedian. It's one of my favorite ways to make use of Netflix. When the comedian's bad, you just turn it to the next possible actual funny person. But this guy is Indian in his heritage, and yet he's also Canadian, and he lives in Los Angeles. He has no discernible accent, but he can make a lot of different accents very well. And he was talking about his father, when they were living in a certain neighborhood, all the houses had driveways that went to a main street, and the children were permitted to play in the driveways, but not on the main street, of course. He was describing how the Caucasian father was speaking to the Caucasian child, giving... Oh, was the mother? No.
No, she was doing this little female impersonation.
Oh, okay, so the Caucasian mother was speaking to the Caucasian child, giving clear direction as to why not to play in the street, why to play only in the driveway. And then he was making a caricature of his father, telling him why he could not play in the street. And his father said something, and he imitated his father's Indian accent, but he said, if you play in the street, you will get hit by the car and you will break apart. And what I heard him say was, you will break apart, you will go into pieces, like you will be everywhere, you will be tossed into pieces. What he heard his father saying is, you will break apart like you'll break a bone. You'll break something, some part of you will break. And so don't go into the street, he was saying. Play only in the driveway. But he thought it was an unhelpful way to tell a child not to play in the street, that you'll break apart.
He grew up thinking it was going to be like Legos, is what he said.
Yeah, he felt like he was like a Lego set. He was going to break apart like that, or like break a Lego. And yet that sense, when he said it about breaking apart, that's what I see happening in some circumstances, that the community is breaking apart, not coming together. And we, in our own inner community, those 100 cousins, they cause you to break apart, not to come together, not to come into harmony, but to get distracted by the 100 ways the mind can be its imbalanced self. So restraint means not entertaining, not like setting out tea and cookies for the 100 ways the mind can go out of balance, not inviting them all in consistently. When you're working at the level of the first chakra, it means restraint enough to stabilize in your tribe, in your root, in your sense of grounding. There is a time to address the 100 ways the mind goes out of balance, but at the first chakra, our task is to come together, to remember the divine that links us. So Sahadeva also represents the earth. That's the element associated with the first chakra. And it represents Apanavayu. So back to the Vayus. Apanavayu is the process of downward and outward. So when you were saying as you're sitting in meditation that you got that feeling, apana is how we release what we no longer need. Now physically that seems obvious, like, the processes of elimination, but it's also mentally releasing what's no longer needed. So things we're holding on to, mental dust bunnies, the residue of stress or harm or beliefs, toxicity, letting that residue go. So the first chakra is where we begin, and then we get to experience the second chakra, and that brother's name is Nakula. Nakula is a warrior. They're all warriors, but Nakula is the archetype warrior self, and his job is to encourage adherence. So you have restraint like the riverbanks, and then you have this thing called adherence. Adherence to what?
To the path.
Yes, adherence to the path. So adherence, for example, to the 26 sattvic qualities of the human heart, adherence to the yamas and the niyamas, adherence to present moment mindfulness, adherence to your lucid mind, not your disturbed and dull mind, adherence to the teachings of yoga. It's like the second chakra represents your loyalty, the strength of that savidyam. Now we're going to be vigorous. We're going to adhere to the teachings. We've nourished, we've protected. Now we have to be vigorous. It's also representing the water element. And if the river banks of restraint are clear, the river adheres to the bed. So it's going in a clear direction that way. What are some things that you imagine you could adhere better to in your own life as a yogini or a yogi?
I think last night when you talked about the straightforwardness in contrast to steadfastness, actually, no, wait, I'm mixing them up now. Now I'm thinking of radiance of character.
Good.
But there's a quality of, like, when I'm in this context, I'm on this path.
Uh-huh.
And then I step into this context and the path eludes me because we don't live in a culture that supports or nourishes the path. And so it feels quite easy to I'm adhering in this place, but then completely forgetting in this place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That has something to do with steadfastness, straightforwardness, and radiance of character in
Mm-hmm.
what you talked about. That
Yeah.
it's that living in it at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. So like steadfast would be the leaning into the process and steadfastly making progress. And straightforward is like the quickening of our directness instead of veering into distraction. And radiance of character we talked about last night as also the feeling of integrity, that you are your most authentic radiant heart. And it's not just reserved for a few people when you're publicly teaching a yoga class or when maybe you're in a counseling session and you're providing the service. That radiance of character we are developing, to quote Jay, unconditionally, non-contingently, and unilaterally, universally. So those three things together would create the combination of things that you would need for adherence. And my imagination tells me that sometimes the yogic path is readily available, and sometimes it feels confused like ripples on the water. If you think of the second chakra as the water element, and when the ripples are going, it's harder to see, but it's still available. The ripples may be family life or bookkeeping, which is different than teaching the yoga class.
Or I think one of the really big things that this last year and a half of training with you has reinforced for me is the importance of just being resourced, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me that feels like the most slippery place where I lose my adherence.
Mm-hmm.
And my intention is always to adhere, but it's really hard to do that when you're too tired, too grumpy, too stressed, too all of these things
Yes.
that pile on. And I'm finally kind of succumbing to that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, fine, I need to be completely resourced and I need to cut out anything that interferes with that because it's just not possible to stay the course.
Yes. Yeah. So if we think of the river analogy one more time, like restraint is the river banks, then the river can adhere to its path. And one thing you're saying right now is, here's the river, don't dump a lot of things in there that are causing it to become obstructed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's harmful. It's harmful to you. It's harmful to your yogic unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So interesting, I was listening to Janina Fisher this morning for a few minutes. It's like mid-afternoon for me by now because I'm up at 5 for my yoga practice, and so I had the luxury of some time to listen to this video she sent out. And she's asking the practitioners to consider this question for their clients when working with shame. When they have a particular thought about themselves, she asks them, is that a resourced thought or a non-resourced thought? Does that make you feel more resourced or less resourced? So are you resourcing or non-resourcing? This is her language. I like that she's using non because we say in yoga, non-harming, non-grasping, non-stealing. So when you're in the midst of that obstruction in the river and you have a certain thought about it, you could ask yourself, is this thought helping me to be more resourced or non-resourced? And some thought like, it's always like this for me, it's probably deflating, but then it'd be non-resourced. And a thought like, here's where I can apply my yogic adherence. You might feel like resources rise from that second chakra up. And it will come into the 4th and 5th chakra to take action here, through 3rd, 4th, and 5th. But if we ask ourselves the question about the thought we're having, it's also contributing to how the river gets obstructed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How many of you have used these two words together in phrases frequently? Yeah, but. And you've heard the recommendation that we change it to yes and. And are you able to make that change for yourself? It means like this is true and. So, for example, the child is crying, the diaper is wet, the husband is overextended, you just got home from teaching a yoga class and you're hungry, and so on and so forth. Yes, and the yogic path is still your commitment. Rather than like, yes, but that was my commitment, so now here it's all falling to pieces. So we get to say yes and. Because some circumstances will truly be challenging. We're not denying or suppressing or distorting them. They are truly challenging. Yeah. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
This is a good example of adherence, not obstructing your own river and keeping it clear so it goes in a very helpful direction, a yogic direction. So you could imagine that Sahadeva and Nakula, why would they push their brother out onto the battlefield? Well, if they've done their jobs well, if they've practiced restraint and adherence, it's time for him to do his job. And Arjuna, his responsibility at the third chakra is fire. It's his responsibility to transform one thing into another, to transform adharma to dharma. It is his responsibility to transform 100 ways the mind goes out of balance and transform them into skillful means to see each of those 100 ways and not to sink or succumb to them. So his fire is third chakra, which is related to our use of will, what I sometimes like to call skillful use of will or right use of will, which is distinct from unskillful use of will or harmful use of will, whether it's harmful to self or others. So he's encouraged to go out onto that battlefield and use his fire for transformation. And he's quite intimidated to do it. He's more than reluctant. So if you imagine yourself as Arjuna turning to look over your left shoulder at Sahadeva and Nakula, are you glad to see them standing there? You're like, thanks, you got my back? Or you're saying, why don't you guys go out there? The first and second chakra are to stabilize us to be ready for the third chakra. So the second chakra is also a place where we experience our vitality, which Kate is referring to keeping her reservoir full, keeping her resource. It's our vitality, it's our sensuality, it's our generativeness. It's where we can experience creativity and spontaneity. If we've been adhering to the yogic path, those things flourish forth through us. And you realize again and again that it actually isn't about you. It's about what's coming through you. And you are the vessel for that process. The first three chakras together represent what we call the earthbound chakras. There's a dividing line in the human body at the diaphragm. So these first three chakras, when working well together, we make good use of the third chakra. But when not working well together, people tend to misuse the responsibilities of the third chakra. So fire is related to samana vayu. So I'm going back to the vayus for a moment. The fire of samana in the Ayurvedic system, when we take in food articles, as he calls them, we take them in, and the fire, samana, should condense around the food and transform it into useful material. So we take in nourishment, and we want it transformed into minerals and nutrients and the things the body needs for the building blocks. We also, in the process of digestion, absorb and then eliminate what's not needed. So if fire is working well, food is transformed into fuel. If fire is not working well, food is transformed into what Ayurveda calls ama. That means the toxic residue. Because if the food's not able to be transformed, absorbed, and properly eliminated, the body has a toxic residue. So when fire isn't working well, people can experience that below the diaphragm, that kind of kapha sluggishness. They get stuck, and their earth and water go out of balance also. Earth and water together, first and second chakra, if they're out of balance, combined is like mud, like muddy. And that's when kapha rules. The person becomes lethargic and more stagnant and more sedentary and less optimistic and maybe less hopeful, and maybe they even feel they don't have a place to contribute. It's just not in their life spectrum. They don't have anything to give. As I was saying last night about some people in our community, when we work in the prison, that never got to develop a sense of self. So that fire of self has not been that bright in them. And yoga is changing that for those students. But for us, as we look at our own chakras, the question is, your earth, water, and fire, are they balanced? When samana is too fiery, so the food comes in and it gets burned, and the person then has heartburn or acid indigestion, or what's called GERD, means gastroesophageal reflux disease. So the fire is going up instead of burning food and sending it down. It's misusing the fire. Because fire can be out of balance if a person is too willful or too driven, or they feel disconnected from the first and second chakra. So the fire is dominating the system, and they have the symptoms of pitta out of balance. And that turns into things like irritability and frustration, resentment, that kind of angst. Has anybody struggled with those things? Yeah, más o menos, we say. So if samana vayu is out of balance, you're also asking, how are the first two chakras needing to come back into restraint and adherence to nurture the third chakra? Does this person need more sense of tribe? Do they have to come together more often with nourishing, protecting people? People who remind them how to care for themselves. Is the second chakra needing some support so that the water element is balanced in them rather than the fire element taking front burner, as it were? Metaphor intended. How would it be if you had the front burner turned on but there was no teapot and no water in the teapot? You would see the fire being wasted, right? Just turn it on and walk out for the day. Come back home. What might you think if you saw the front burner was on while you were out? Oh my God, the house could have burned down. Oh, what a waste of fire. It's not cooking anything. Why is it there? If you think of samana out of balance, it's like that. So fire burning but not having a usefulness for it. So the teapot is like the first chakra, the restraint, adherence, and you pour the water into the container. Now water can be transformed by fire into steam. So Arjuna has to go into the purposeful transformation of his mind. That is our task at the third chakra, which leads us like a ladder to the fourth chakra. The third chakra out of balance is like when people have no sense of will, or when they have a sense that they should dominate their will. Like being a bully to yourself. The third chakra out of balance is also the fire of consuming, like things, material things, food things, activity things, experience things, thought things, sense things, the consuming of things. It's like desire out of balance. Gluttony, you can think of that. Avarice, greed. Wrath. Remember last night in the 26 sattvic qualities of the human heart, we had absence of wrath and absence of greed. So when the third chakra is out of balance forward, it's burning its own resources and others by consuming and looking for more power, not more collaboration. When the third chakra is out of balance back this way, then it has too little fire, like just a little smolder back there, not enough sense of will. So that's how that succumbs to first and second chakra and the kapha stagnation. The good news is you can bring these things into balance by going first chakra, second chakra, third chakra. And the even better news is when those are in balance, you get to rise to the fourth chakra. So the chakras above the diaphragm are considered like the heavenly chakras. They help you to ascend or transcend, to experience that which is bigger than your personal life responsibilities, first, second, and third chakra. So when you get to the fourth chakra, which is called Anahata, the third is Manipurna, the second is Svadhisthana, and the first is Muladhara. When you get to the fourth chakra, you meet this character whose name is Bhima. The fourth chakra is governed by the wind, and Bhima's responsibility is love in every direction. Again, I'll use Jay's 3 favorite words: loving unconditionally, non-contingently, and unilaterally, regardless of the circumstances, without need of return, without it having to be bilateral, like the other person has to return it. This love is unconditional, universal, non-contingent. And so if Arjuna is walking out onto the battlefield and he looks over his right shoulder and he sees Bhima, he might envy Bhima's position, because Bhima's resting back there in love, right? Saying, "You go, brother. You got things to do." But it's not Bhima's dharma to go onto the battlefield. Bhima becomes more radiant and more expressive when Arjuna has done his job. So, in fact, if Bhima is sitting back behind Arjuna's right shoulder and Arjuna looks back, Bhima probably feels a certain amount of angst and earnestness for Arjuna to keep going, because the fourth chakra relies on the third chakra to do its work. So Arjuna has to tend to the 100 ways the mind goes out of balance. And when he comes back to his brothers, Bhima will shine more. And the heart represents the Vayu we call Vyana Vayu, V-Y-A-N-A, Vyana. And Vyana means how from the center of the heart, the body recirculates back out to its periphery. So if samana takes the food particles in and burns them and transforms, absorbing what we need, eliminating what we don't, what's absorbed goes to the bloodstream and should then, from the heart, the center, be circulated back out into all regions that are needing the nutrients, the minerals. And the process of extending from the heart outwards is similar to, it's a physiological thing I'm saying, but it's similar to the psychological responsibility of the heart chakra. It circulates outwards. It needs to know from its own center, but it circulates outwards. So Vyana Vayu, when that's in balance, the energy goes like this. You were describing going up, so you'll hear that in the fifth chakra. Any questions about Bhima? Do you feel endeared by his responsibility? Just for love? He also has to be devoted. So you could say love and devotion, like in the path of bhakti yoga. His brothers set up the foundation, first, second, third. It's not like he gets off easy, however. You recall that in some ways the path of love is more arduous, because in bhakti yoga we have this temporary suspension of our underlying unity, to have the other to be devoted to. It's like a, how do you say people are having a skit or a play? It's like I'm missing a word. You don't have it either, huh? I'm asking Jay for word finding. It's not likely, huh?
I'm not quite grasping what it is you're trying to get at.
Well, you have this temporary suspension, like you're on the play, you're on the stage.
Suspension
like
of disbelief.
Suspension of disbelief, yes. But I was thinking of when people are on a stage and they're acting something out. What do we call that? Oh, like a drama, a dramatization. So in bhakti yoga, for a time, the yogi or yogini says, "Oh, I will suspend the underlying sense that we're all one, so that I can have this play in my life, this place to be devoted, to express my love and longing, to have the heart ache for that reunion with the divine. And I'm just temporarily suspending it so I can ache until the heart breaks with the reunion itself." It's like Rumi and Hafiz, they were bhakti yogis. They were exalted towards the divine and unceasingly so. Right? So their hearts kept breaking with the divine, and sometimes Rumi's poetry would say like how the divine had left him, but actually it had never left him, but he enjoyed the reunion so much that he entertained that it had left him. And you might meet people in modern day life who you would think of as too dramatic about these sorts of things, like in their actual interpersonal lives. But Rumi was quite awakened to his experience. So let's not misunderstand that. If you have friends who are constantly going from one relationship to the next and their heart breaks and then it reunions with the divine embodied in this person or that person or the next person, they might have to balance their first, second, third chakras. What Rumi's experience was of that exalted realization that the fire burns the stick and the stick gives itself to the fire. And the pot is the vessel, and then the pot breaks and it breaks open. I'm hinting at Rumi's poetry when I say those things. So it's a temporary lila. The word in yoga is lila, the temporary play of that. Bhima's responsibility is for that love and longing. And he posits a challenge then to his brother at the 5th chakra, whose name is Yudhishthira. Yudhi means war, and stira means steadiness. So that can seem like a quandary if you think of, well, here we are at the 5th chakra, why are we talking about war and steadiness? So if the heart is going to express that unconditional, expansive love, the vessel through which we then start expressing is in speech. It's in action and speech, but speech comes through the 3rd chakra, the throat. And Yudhishthira's job is to remain steady even in times of conflict. To remain steady even in the face of war. And this story of the Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield, yes. The 5th chakra, yeah. Which represents the ether element. So it's going to be steady in conflict. Conflict will likely arise as the 1st, 2nd, 3rd chakra come into balance, the 4th chakra, and someone starts to beam love and grace in every direction. The conflict that may arise is that they're coming into a larger sense of self, and we live in a culture that sees the small self as the main thing to protect. And so you start having interpersonal dilemma as a sign that you're evolving. Not a sign that you're devolving, but you're actually evolving. Do you understand what I mean by that dilemma? Mm-hmm. And then we try to speak. But sometimes we might speak before we've practiced speaking, so it doesn't come out quite how we meant it to. And the other person might mishear what we're saying, or we might missay it. And then you have this bubble of conflict and the dilemma interpersonally. But Yudhishthira says, no, I'm going to be totally steady even in this conflict. And he is steady, relying on his brothers. His sense of restraint, adherence, willfulness in a good direction, and love. It's very interesting to me that the 2nd chakra and the 5th chakra have a significant relationship, and that those are actually representing also the gut-brain axis. So in the throat, at the center of the 5th chakra, you have the vagus nerve, vagus meaning wandering in Latin. And when we have a perceived emergency, a perceived danger, we have the option of freeze or submit. We have fight or flight also, I'll talk about in a moment, but freeze and submit are when the vagus nerve shuts down, and one of the outcomes of that is that we lose access to our words. So when in the face of perceived or real danger, if a person goes to a dorsal vagal response, meaning the bottom end of the spectrum, that dorsal vagal response is a gut shutdown and a language center shutdown. So we actually lose access to our verbal capacity and our words. And I'm sure some of you have experienced this from time to time, where you're very distressed and you get shut down enough that you don't have anything to say about it, and words might be on the inside, but they don't seem to be coming out into the outside world. You're nodding your heads, this has happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that sign is of the dorsal vagal reaction to stress, and both the gut and the 5th chakra, 2nd and 5th chakra, are shutting down for your preservation. The other thing I'm very fond of in Janina Fisher's work, when she's talking about shame, she says, well, how did it help you? Well, it kept you alive. This instinct that occurred was part of your preservation, knowingly or unknowingly. And you can imagine that a dorsal vagal shutdown preserves a human being when they might speak unwisely. However, getting stuck in that dorsal vagal shutdown doesn't bring the chakras into balance and makes us more timid about life and less able to live into what Yudhishthira is recommending. So we go back down to the first chakra, second chakra, and you work from the base up to help clear that. Like if it's dorsal vagal response, you go back down to breathing, moving, humming. Like things you might think of as that even an infant could do to help soothe themselves. Now humming is in the throat, but it's helping the gut-brain axis also. Breathing and moving are helping. And then we can re-promote the ventral vagal response, which is to say reaching back for social connections that are protective and nourishing and that provide empathy and refuge, love and compassion. So those 5 chakras together, if you have a sense of where you tend to go out of balance yourself, like if you consistently lose your words or you hold a lot of belly tension, or you find that you shrink back and feel you have no way to contribute, you're looking to see where is your chakra system in balance or out of balance. And then we start to remedy that. Now, Udana Vayu, let's say that it's working well at the 5th chakra, which is the center for Udana Vayu, means flowing upwards. So then the words that are spoken help elevate both people. We flow upwards. Udana sends energy to the brain, and then Prana Vayu gets to work well. Prana is considered the king of the Vayus, and as I said to the Ayurveda training this past week, when the king isn't home, what happens to the kingdom? It sort of falls to pieces. So if the Vayus are out of balance, and what's happening is you don't have first and second chakra, or Apana and Samana Vayu aren't working well. Maybe Vyana Vayu is a little bit dull, and all you have is Udana, like a lot of talking and a lot of thinking, Prana Vayu. Udana and Prana Vayu are sending you away from your own kingdom. Lost in the ethers, as they say. And this 5th chakra is the ethers. So if Udana is rising, but without the benefit of the lower Vayus, if Prana is expansive and off in the clouds, the kingdom doesn't have a king at home. And that's what happened when the 5 brothers lost their kingdom in the gambling match. They lost the match and gave the kingdom to their cousins. They had to go to the forest. They had to go away from home to practice restraint, adherence, will, love, and clarity. Then they got to come back and say, okay, how's the kingdom? Oh my God, it's all shit. What are we going to do? So if you think of the Vayus as an equivalent metaphor, when the king is gone, the Vayus are out of balance. You have to bring the king home, and you start with Apana Vayu to steady yourself there. But when you had in meditation that feeling from here going up, this is very much how the Vayus work. And the chakras want to take us from the heart to the 5th, to the 6th, to the 7th. Yeah. Do you have any questions or observations right now? There's a lot of information to take in, but questions help me to know what you're hearing and help other people also. And any contributions at all from you, welcome and required.
I'm curious about, seeking pleasure versus experiencing your vitality, your sensuality, and your spontaneity. Like the discernment of those things. Like one's out of balance and one direction is more in balance, but being in alignment with the chakras. But I think that's where I get hung up.
Tell me a little more your question.
Well, longing or attraction is cause of suffering, right? Mm-hmm. And yet being in your feeling fully resourced and sensual and creative is more contained and more but shared with the world in a different way than that longing.
Mm-hmm.
Variation on it.
When you're describing longing, your hand gesture is out like this.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're describing the other qualities, your hand gesture is more in.
Yeah.
Is this your experience? That
Yes.
longing pulls you away?
Yes.
Yeah. And creativity or sensuality brings you in?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So how do you spend your time?
Well, I occasionally have longing, but I am creative and I do have community and I do nourish myself and try and feel resourced.
Mm-hmm.
But occasionally in my longing, that gets out of balance.
Yeah.
So that's like continually redirecting.
Mm-hmm.
But spontaneity, like I feel like I cut myself off from spontaneity a little bit with redirecting. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I'm referring to sensuality, if we think of the five senses as first for our preservation and then second for the experience of pleasure, I don't mean pleasure like on the pendulum between grasping and aversion, but for example, to be able to explore the senses and experience deep satiation, like profound appreciation and pleasure from the senses, that can be a vessel for awakening. It's really the foundation of tantric yoga. To be able to use the senses and all their representations and manifestations for the purpose of awakening from suffering, from isolation, from contraction into expansion and liberation. So if somebody, as a human being, for example, didn't have the experience of taste, like their tongue didn't register flavor, quite likely they feel depressed. If food had no flavor, if it was bland, if it was just like it came over the palate and it was to nurture and give some calories so the brain could keep going, we'd probably lose some of our luster for life. You have a dog, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Does your dog love flavor?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very food
Yes.
motivated.
Yeah. And it isn't just to consume the food. It's not actually the appetite as much as sometimes it's the flavor part. Like dogs have incredible sense of smell and also taste. And sometimes we keep Poquito's brain exercise better than his body because he can't walk. And we give him a frozen soup bone. He's invested. He's completely focused on the soup bone. Divine meditation on soup bones. So when longing emerges and you feel yourself being pulled out that way, a practice you might take on so that you don't end up like putting a hole in your teapot where the water drains out. Second chakra is water. A practice you might explore would be to take any one of the sense experiences and seek deep, deep appreciation for that sense. So if it's listening to something very pleasant, listening into how your brain and body respond when there's satiation of sound, deep gratification, and gratitude, yes, for the feeling that you can have sound. Or flavor, to eat something really mindfully and slowly and feel how satiating that is to your brain. The quantity that you eat with mindful eating, let's say, is 3 raisins. That's the most famous experiment that they do. The quantity is not calorically fulfilling, but the brain is really satisfied by having been present to all the possible flavor sensations in there. So watch when you take this task, and it's just a small thing like 3 raisins or a small piece of music, and see how your brain actually lights up to feel so connected to life. And it may limit the longing that's pulling you away from home. Like a kite going off to the sky, you're going to come back down to the center of the second chakra. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that.
I have this, I'm very fond of this body scrub that somebody gave me. I don't know where we got it. I think it has olive oil and scrubby salt, and it smells like lemons. It's very nice. And I really like to use it for my skin. It's like partly abhyanga, but being that I'm a Pitta constitution, I also like to scrub the skin, and Kapha is my second constitution. So this works really well for me. And this morning I had a nice bath and blah blah yoga practice and some chai. It's like, quite relaxing. And then I realized I didn't get to use my salt scrub. So I had to dash into the shower, and I was quickly rubbing it on like this because now I was late, right? And I was doing it fast. Okay, now shower, rinse it off, now towel, and then get dressed. I didn't really enjoy the salt scrub that much. It felt purposeful because the skin being oiled is better in Vata season. So pragmatically I got the need met. But in terms of my brain lighting up about the experience on the skin, I didn't get to immerse in that. I had other immersions this morning, like my yoga practice and Shavasana with Deo brought Mishra's music playing in the background and just absorbing and letting the brain feel really satiated. But that one, when I was rushing, I noticed. So how many times are we also misusing the senses, or we're assaulting them because we're rushing, or we're too busy, or we're overscheduled, and so on? That might be the second question to ask yourself is there some way that you're contributing to the angst and the longing with these little leaks in the teapot, as it were? So if my whole morning was rushing, like yoga, okay, music, okay, now the bath, okay, now get dressed, okay, dog outside, oh, pick up the dog, put the dog down, okay, dog pee, okay, get the dog, bring the dog back in, okay, feed the dog, next thing, then the brain would feel very scattered and unsatisfied. And the dog and cat brain, your limbic brain, they do need to feel some satiation, some sense of resting. And part of that we seek through pleasure, but also through connection. Just like your dog seeks connection, we too seek connection for a sense of being satisfied and grounded. So that comes back to the first chakra again. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. What else are you, Millie? Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about how you would use this approach if you're working with someone with like addiction, specifically how to replace the addictive tendencies. Like that's your comfort, that's your like social connection is your addiction. So
I mean, like they're engaging in the same kind of addiction? Or they're all engaging in addictions of their own kind, but in proximity to each other?
well, more like you get your comfort and feeling like the feeling of like stability and comfort and groundedness in the world comes from activating, like engaging in your addiction.
What do you think about that? I got confused.
If I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, I've seen that a lot with people in my practice. Particularly, it's specific to this population of people with addictions. But
I've heard people in anticipation of reducing or eliminating their use of their favorite substance, the fear that they're going to lose fun, companionship, the dominant activity, the one thing that they really look forward to reliably and so on. That's standard operating procedure when people face that. And many people don't even come face to face with it because it's just, they're just going to stay on that groove. But as soon as it comes up, gets in their face that maybe they ought to reconsider it, like a DUI or an unhappy spouse or problems at work or whatever it is, that then it's kind of the wake-up call. Then they start to face it, and it can take quite a while before people decide to even put the brakes on, let alone come to a stop. And that's some sort of metaphorical what I'm talking about, is that you have to face those fears and lose, in some sense, forsake the taste that you've developed for that. And eventually then substitute something else in. People oftentimes will say, well, if I don't do that, then I'm going to have to do something else. And I understand that thinking. And I think there's some truth to it. However, if you haven't, so the vessel's full already, it's hard to put something else in there. So you do have to get some of that out of there for something else to get in there. And if you don't get a fair portion of it out of there, then when you try to put something else in there, you don't get enough to get any momentum to it. So I guess what I'm saying is essentially you have to face the fears and work on eliminating that which has been sated by this. But just face directly against the thing that you've been using. You may have to just have faith that it's not good for you, or
Mhm.
faith that something else is good for you, and push through that until there's a little bit of space in there to put something else in. And that includes a lot of things.
Mhm.
People will stay in the use of a substance or some behavior because they're afraid that they will lose a spouse,
Mhm.
they'll lose their family, they'll lose their job, they'll lose their friends, they'll lose their identity. And so those are pretty potent forces to keep people on the path they're on. So it's no small matter to get somebody to shift out of that. So there's pretty potent clinging
Mhm.
to it. It may be just the opposite, by the way, right? That if they don't abandon the addiction, they are going to lose all those things.
Yeah.
Now, it seems ironic, but in that, when you look at it in terms of the aversion, if they've come to see it that way, that's the way they're going to operate. We respond to what we perceive, valid or not.
Mhm.
So I often sort of inoculate people, well, maybe you are going to face that. I sort of facetiously say,